Changing the Bloblobber is complicated. Few weapons in Splatoon are as controversial as the Bloblobber, having as many vehement critics in the player base as there are strong defenders. Fewer weapons still have fair arguments on both sides. There's truth in saying the Bloblobber is brain-dead, as well as advocating for its untapped skill ceiling. However, as your resident Blob main, I'm here to do my best to evaluate how the weapon stands right now, both what it does right and what it doesn't, and use that information to improve upon it for the next game. I'll be doing my best both to come up with unique ideas as well as stay neutral on the subject, but fair warning, I do quite like the little bathtub, and while I'm not afraid to call out what it does wrong, I'm very fond of what it's gotten right. Alright, so first off, what does the Bloblobber do well? To start, its gimmick has an incredible premise. It gains an ability that no other weapon in the game has, but in order to keep it balanced, it has the slowest shot velocity in either game. While boasting huge bubble hitboxes, they are far apart and easy to both see and avoid when shot straight on. To combat this, it has the unique power to bounce its bubbles off of walls and the floor to refract shots. This adds an element of strategy completely unseen to the rest of the game, even more drastic than the Slosher's and Blaster's ability to fight around blocks and walls. The Bloblobber thrives less on mechanical skill and more on game knowledge and experience, plus some geometry. Frankly, this is the aspect of the Blob that I find has been least explored at the top level. In the hands of someone who knows the game's maps like the back of their hand and is good at predicting movements, the Bloblobber can be incredibly formidable. However, its possibilities here have been left largely ignored, likely due to the fact that the analysis it requires is wildly different to anything else in the game as of now. It's simply too much work in comparison to other weapons in the meta that get the job done easier. In addition, Bloblobber shares Jet Squelcher's title of longer range weapon that can fend for itself pretty well. It has mobility and paint coverage better than standard backline weapons, making it able to adapt to shorter range situations well, while still suffering some drawbacks to ensure it doesn't fall into the frontline role too readily. It's good enough at close fighting that you won't flail about when caught off guard, but bad enough that it should deter new players from getting too close in favor of other weapons that are made for the job. Honestly, I think that the Bloblobber's design basis and concept are incredibly strong and done well. This, however, leads us into the weapon's flaws: the numbers. While the Blob has a good design and balance in concept, its implementation leads to many issues that make it incredibly flawed. It allows for 12 volleys of bubbles in an ink tank, but with enough ink saver main, you can nearly double this number to 23. In addition to the fact that you can swing it twice a second, it's a prime spam weapon, making it common in the lower ranks for this exact reason. Spamming shots can absolutely lock a team out of an area for large amounts of time with minimal effort. Additionally, the Bloblobber's bubbles never lose damage, always dealing a constant 30 per bubble for a total of 120 damage per volley. While they decrease in size with distance, this fact makes it incredibly easy to walk into a full volley at the edge of its range and die. This is, again, a feature that makes it common in the lower ranks, where players getting accidental kills feel the weapon is good, while causing it to taper the higher up you go due to people getting better at avoiding the stray shots. While I don't consider it to be a weak point in its design, I find it important to mention the Bloblobber's inconsistent range. Due to the fact that its shots bounce and only stop after hitting the ground 3 times, the Blob deals with inclines in a unique way. On flat ground, it has about equal range to a Hydra. However, when shooting uphill, this range decreases. More importantly, when dealing with steep downward inclines, the Bloblobber's range becomes ridiculous, with the weapon nearly able to reach mid on moray towers while shooting from the highest platform. I don't consider it to be a design flaw, as it has its upsides and downsides, and while its benefits can be a tad absurd, they have incredibly niche uses and are generally not utilized due to difficulty to abuse. The final weakness in the Bloblobber's design is one that's really an explanation for everything else it does wrong. It's indecision. The Blob wants to play an aggressive mobile support just as much as it wants to be a stationary pressure to contested areas, and that's where I think most of the flaws originate from. It has the mobility and efficiency of a more supportive weapon, with the constant high damage and range of one more stationary. This means when a Blob is playing aggressively, it has the ability to play up front with incredibly lethal range, and that's horrid to fight against. On the flip side, when it's more of a backline, the Bloblobber never runs out of ink and is difficult to displace due to its ability to fight up close. I think the best way I'd describe it is that the devs created a concept for an entire subclass, but instead implemented it all into one weapon. Instead of having different kinds of Bloblobbers varying from a carbon equivalent to a dynamo, they were all thrown into a single weapon as a one-off gimmick. This last point makes it much easier to fix the Bloblobber in a way that keeps its strengths, while addressing its flaws. Turn it into 2 distinct weapons. One will focus more on mobility and support. This will entail more changes that could be introduced in normal patches. The second will be a backline type weapon, with adjustments that make it stand out from its counterpart more. Since I found that the support of Blob will be closer to its current iteration in Splatoon 2, I will keep the namesake of Bloblobber. The new heavy Bloblobber will be aptly named the Blob Heavy because I'm incredibly creative. As a quick note, I'm not an expert on the map of Splatoon or its balance, so I'll be doing my best to supplement my ideas with numbers, but they are incredibly loose due to my inexperience with this kind of analysis of the game. Let's start off with the new support Bloblobber. We want to make it better at fighting up close and worse at damaging from afar, as well as keeping the feel of the base weapon. The first step is to slightly decrease its base range. Nothing too drastic, as it should still be able to make good use of its bouncing gimmick, but I think reducing it to somewhere between the range of the Jet Squelcher and Explosher, the two weapons with the next lowest ranges, would be reasonable. Additionally, the third bounce of bubbles can no longer one volley kill. They'll instead deal reduced damage. I'm thinking all 4 bubbles should deal a total between 55 and 80 damage. This is incredibly dependent on how much we want to alter this Bloblobber in comparison to its current state. The faster and closer range we make it, the less damage it should do. This damage reduction reduces its ability to accidentally kill at long distances without removing its lethal capabilities when bouncing off of walls. The Bloblobber gets 2 bounces before stopping on the third. However, this is exclusively for the floor. It can bounce bubbles off of walls infinitely so long as they never reach the ground, meaning up-close wall bounces to reach behind blocks and catch people off guard will still be effective while making long-distance pressure harder. It can still support from farther away, but it will be dependent on someone else being closer to the enemy to do supplemental damage rather than being lethal on its own. Also, as a quick side note, the Bloblobber will now paint worse farther away as the bubbles decay, creating more of a triangle shape. The next thing to change with this version of the Bloblobber is its mobility. Currently, the Blob has okay movement, making it great at backline but kind of up close. In order to encourage more aggressive plays, 2 mobility options for the Bloblobber should be changed. For one, its strafe speed while shooting should be increased. I have no idea how strafe speed balance works between rolls, but right now movement while firing is 0.5 units a frame, and I think that should be higher. Since firing a volley takes a relatively long amount of time, adjusting during this volley should be easier when fighting up close. However, it can't be too fast, as that will lead to more shoot the weapon until you're out of ink than rinse and repeat in lower level players. This leads into the second mobility change, end lag. I think the end lag before shooting another volley is fine as is. I don't want to risk making this weapon even more spammy. However, in order to encourage movement between volleys and allow for competence around faster weapons, I think the interval between when the weapon is fired and when you can become a squid should be lowered. Right now, it takes 32 frames to fire the weapon repeatedly and 25 to shoot one and then do anything else. Again, this is an area I'm not well versed in, but I feel lowering it to between 15 and 20 frames will incentivize players picking up the weapon to relocate rather than shoot repeatedly. When playing up close, repeated volleys shot predictably towards someone makes you incredibly vulnerable. However, using the Bloblobber's bounces, or even just shooting one volley and repositioning, makes it much more likely to win an engagement and thus encourages a more mobile and thoughtful playstyle. Finally, I think the Bloblobber should be just a little bit more ink hungry. Nothing too big, maybe reducing 1 or 2 volleys per tank to further encourage going into squid form and moving around. This is a pretty common change I see when addressing the Bloblobber, and there's a reason for that. Also, I'd propose that Inksaver main become less efficient with the Bloblobber as well. While 3 peers of Inksaver will always make a large difference, it doesn't affect every weapon with the same ratio of shots. As a result, it's reasonable to propose that the maximum number of shots a Bloblobber can throw on one tank should be reduced. Say we change the base ink efficiency to 10%. Currently, this would make the maximum amount of volleys using Inksaver main about 19. Instead, this number should be lowered to something similar to the Sploosh's Inksaver main efficiency at 150%, making the new max 15 volleys. This will make it so that players will have to invest a lot more chunks into Inksaver main in order to make large use of it, further incentivizing less spam. Alright, now for the Blob Heavy. Going in the same order as last time, the Blob Heavy should have the same range as the Splatoon 2 Bloblobber. I'd be open to giving it a longer range, maybe matching Splat Charger, but I don't really see any reason for it. However, the bubble size decay will be largely decreased, reverting the last bounce nearly back to the same size as the original volley, though not quite. I think there's also potential in the idea that the last bounce will have less height reduction, behaving more similarly to the middle bounce in terms of distance and vertical height. Additionally, I think the Blob Heavy could potentially volley 3 bubbles instead of 4, these now dealing somewhere between 38 and 40 damage to keep its kill potential with one volley, the same as its support counterpart, while slightly decreasing its paint power when spreading its shots, in addition to making it less shots to kill, which will be important as a long-range weapon. This will also make it more distinct from its other form, making it clear that the two are different. Also, the Blob Heavy will not suffer the decreased paint at longer range that the new Bloblobber does, maintaining its current paint. A large change with the Blob Heavy will be a decrease in its mobility. I borrowed a lot of the numbers I'm about to say from the Tin Umbrella and Explosion, so basically imagine the Blob Heavy to have a playstyle roughly similar to a speed between those two. To begin, the Blob Heavy will, predictably, become a heavyweight weapon, moving slower in the ink and while walking. I'm going to heavily nerf the weapon's strafe speed down to 0.4 as well. In addition, the startup and in lag for the Blob Heavy will be nerfed. Initial startup will only be reduced slightly, changing it from 10 frames to 11 or 12. The time for a repeated swing will be increased from 32 frames to 40, and the time it takes to go into SWID form will change from 25 to 35 frames. Again, I have no idea how to balance this well, these are just rough numbers to get a feel for how the weapon will be slowed down. Basically, I'm trying to make it so that this is as unpleasant to spam in quick succession as possible. Next up is ink efficiency. I'm not gonna lie, I was pretty torn on how to handle this. On one hand, I could keep higher efficiency and risk designing a weapon that's still incredibly brain dead, albeit slower, and on the other, I risk nerfing it into oblivion. In the end, I decided that the best play was to nerf ink efficiency down to roughly 7 volleys per tank. However, this is in balance with two other things. For one, the Blob Heavy will not undergo the same ink saver main nerf as the new Bloblobber, meaning its max will be 13 or 14 shots instead of just 10. Additionally, and maybe more importantly, the lag for ink recovery will be reduced. I want it to be drastic without breaking the weapon. I was thinking of turning it into a 30 frame delay rather than 40. Even with all this said and done, it probably looks like the Blob Heavy is suffering a lot of nerfs without any substantial buffs to make it a feasible weapon. And that's because we're using the Blob Heavy to revert the Bloblobber object damage nerf. That means the Blob Heavy will deal about 20% extra damage to any object. I'll be honest, this is a bit of a selfish change because I really miss the Bloblobber's Rainmaker niche days, and it's so weird to have people who started playing the game recently question why I use Blob on Rainmaker. Hopefully the movement and ink nerfs are balanced enough with this object buff to make it still balanced and usable. And that's my ideas for how the Bloblobber could be reworked going forward. I really love this weapon and think it's a brilliant concept, but there's still some very valid complaints about how it stands now. I'm a lot more confident with my support blob patches than I am with my heavy blob concept, as I have more experience playing the Bloblobber in that fashion than I do using it as a backline or zoner. If you're big into Splatoon's patches and numbers, what do you think? My biggest worry was making the Blob Heavy too similar to the Explosion, or alternatively turning it basically unviable in high-level play. How would you rebalance the Bloblobber? Let me know in the comments. Also, thanks so much for the support recently. I can't believe I hit 100 subscribers within 2 videos, and we're already flying past it as I write the script for this. But anyways, that's all I've got for this video. Subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see y'all later.